Learning to program is about self-driven exploration. Universities help guide you, coding bootcamps provide a rigorous environment to work in, and online coding courses provide content for you to study. But none of this by itself will turn you into a great programmer. You need the drive to improve and the curiosity to explore. The Recurse Center is a place where people can come to become better programmers. Nick Bergson-Shilcock is a founder of the Recurse Center, and he joins the show today to discuss how Recurse Center works, why he started it, why it's important to influence programmers to have this curiosity to explore and this self-driven exploration. This episode is a continuation of our exploration of coding boot camps and online courses and universities, these different pillars of programming education. And the Recurse Center is a really interesting study because it presents yet another unique model for improving as a programmer, for learning new programming skills and programming languages. I hope you enjoy this episode, the Recurse Center with Nick Bergson-Shilcock. This episode of Software Engineering Daily is sponsored by Braintree Payments. Mobile app development can be complex, but integrating your payments no longer has to be complex. With Braintree, your business can accept nearly every type of payment from any device with just one integration. Learn more at braintreepayments.com/SEdaily. Braintree's API supports Android, iOS, JavaScript, and many other languages. The documentation for Braintree is clear and elegant, and if you're integrating payments into your app for the first time, you can call Braintree's customer service and get assistance with your integration. Don't get frustrated when you're trying to integrate payments and monetization into your app. Go to braintreepayments.com/SEdaily and monetize your app today. braintreepayments.com/SEdaily. Now let's get on with this episode of Software Engineering Daily. Thanks for listening. Nick Bergson-Shilcock is a founder of the Recurse Center. Nick, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Thank you for having me.
So what is the Recurse Center?
So RC is a free educational retreat for people who want to become better programmers. So it is a very self-directed environment. People come from all over the world to spend either 6 weeks or 12 weeks focused on writing open source software and collaborating in a very self-directed environment with other folks who also want to become better programmers.
What do people do when they join the Recurse Center?
So our core motivation and focus is helping people grow as programmers. So we try to build an environment that removes as many obstacles as possible in the way of people's growth. So the primary thing that people are doing at RC is focusing on how they can become better programmers. So what that looks like for individual people varies greatly because the people who come to RC come from a tremendously diverse range of backgrounds. So the primary thing that most people are doing at RC is programming, but what that looks like day to day is highly individualistic. So that might include doing code reviews, contributing to open source projects, starting your own project, doing a lot of pair programming, running or attending small workshops or seminars, giving presentations. It's kind of a whole range of things that people do day to day at RC, and it's really based off of what their individual goals are and how they want to become better programmers.
So we've done a bunch of shows about coding boot camps, some shows about university education, shows about online education formats for software engineering. How does Recurse Center contrast with those different mediums for education?
So I think there are kind of two dimensions in which you can think about this question. The first are just the very practical, logistical differences we have, and the second are kind of the philosophical differences. So we like to describe RC as like a writer's retreat, but for computer programmers. So people come from all over the world to spend their time at RC focused on becoming better programmers. But it's a very self-directed environment. So we do not have a curriculum. We don't have teachers. People are not coming for job prep or training. They are coming because they want to become better programmers. So I think that's the first big difference, is that we are very self-directed. And that ties into one of our kind of core philosophical beliefs, which is that people learn best and fastest when they are in control of what they're doing, and when they have the freedom and the opportunity to focus on what they're actually interested in.
Okay. So could you give me a few disparate examples of people who have come through the Recurse Center, what they did at Recurse Center, who they are, and what they did afterwards?
Absolutely. So there's I'll kind of give you a sampling of a wide spectrum of folks. So RC attracts some very experienced programmers. So for instance, we have an alum named Chris Ball, who came to RC having worked in the industry for a number of years. He had been VP of engineering at a venture-backed startup. I think he was the lead developer on the OLPC project, had done substantial open source work, and he took RC as basically a 3-month sabbatical where he focused on his personal growth, and worked on one major project for the entirety of his time, which was building a distributed, basically a distributed version of GitHub on top of the BitTorrent protocol, called GitTorrent. And after RC, he went on to be a software engineer at Keybase. So that's kind of one extreme of very experienced programmers coming and using RC as like a 3-month sabbatical. On the flip side, we have folks who are very new programmers who come to RC, who maybe have been programming for just a few months, and are just kind of getting their feet wet. They've gotten past the point of tutorials or just kind of writing the first few small programs, and they want to kind of go to the next level. And so we have lots of examples of folks like that who have come and spent time working on typically a series of smaller projects, and then possibly after RC, they take their first programming job. One important note is that people do not need to want a new programming job in order to come to RC. A lot of people come to RC and afterwards don't choose to take a new programming job. Maybe they're in the middle of graduate school, or they want to start their own company eventually, or they're freelance programmers. So we are not actually focused on just people who are interested in new programming jobs. We're focused in anyone who wants to come and spend 3 months becoming better programmers.
I love the flatness of the proposition that the Recurse Center offers, because people learn programming at such a variety of rates, and they pursue such a variety of things throughout their programming education. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to have a linear path. I mean, some people learn very well through highly structured coursework. Other people learn through doing projects. Other people learn from doing a bunch of Project Euler problems or going through a coding textbook. It's really this expansive there's expansive area of different paths that you can take through the educational process of programming. And it sounds like Recurse Center sort of offers a buffet of options for people who want to explore it in their own way.
I think that's exactly right. I think you can kind of think of RC as kind of the a la carte option. So people come here and maybe they spend their time at RC partially focused on working on their own open source projects, partially focused on doing an online course, maybe organizing a code review or a computer science theory book club. They can draw upon lots of different resources. I think one of the great things about the internet and today is there's already more educational material than any of us could possibly consume in a lifetime. And so we at RC kind of start with the idea that the primary obstacles in the way of people's growth and the things that will really help people get better it's not just how do we devise some perfect, ordering of information and what is the right set of information to give each person, right? Because what each person needs is going to be very different. The things that we see as much bigger blockers in the way of people's growth is access to highly motivated peers and other smart folks who can help you learn. It's things like having enough time to actually focus in very large chunks. It's being afraid to acknowledge when you don't know something, even just to yourself, so that you can then dive into learning that thing. And so a lot of the focus at RC is how do we build kind of an environment in which people can be very autonomous and self-directed, but that helps them be much more efficient and effective in their learning.
Yeah, and much of that plays into the environmental challenges, the attitude challenges that are encoded into the code of conduct and the frequently asked questions at Recurse Center. But one thing that came to mind when you were talking just now is, in contrast to a coding boot camp. So I know some people who have gone through coding boot camps recently. They like the coding boot camp experience, but some of them, at least one of them, has commented on like the expense of a coding boot camp, and what are you really paying for with the boot camp? You're paying for this education process, but as you remarked just now, like there's plenty of online resources for that education process. So what do you really need to pay for? Well, the most important thing that you're getting out of paying for a coding boot camp is probably access to a group of people that you're interacting with, and really that social setting, that feeling of electricity when you walk into the room of everybody's working on something, they're hacking on something, and they're really motivated. But when you look at it that way, then a lot of the coding boot camps perhaps have a little extra fat around the edges in terms of creating content that they could just repurpose content online if people actually want that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we started RC about 5.5 years ago, there was no such thing as coding boot camps. That wasn't even a term. But what we were kind of starting with is my co-founders and I talking about our college experiences. One of my co-founders and I, we both went to a pretty traditional computer science program. And we enjoyed it. We really benefited a lot from it. I'm not one of those kind of anti-college or anti-university folks. But there are kind of two things. One is it didn't feel like it helped us become better programmers that much. We felt like a lot of our growth as programmers came from either work we did on our own or our first internships or things like that. And the other is...
Or hanging out in the computer lab.
Exactly. And that was the other big thing, which is a big part of what we got out of our university experiences was the set of people that it introduced us to. In fact, that's actually how I met one of my co-founders. Is we were in the same college class together. And it seems really odd when you step back and think about it that you ought to have to spend, $15,000 or $20,000 on a boot camp, or, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars even on a university education, just for the opportunity to, meet other people who have similarly paid so much money.
So for those who might be confused, Recurse Center is a business. You make money through job placements. After people go through the Recurse Center, you encourage them to get jobs through the Recurse, or you don't encourage them to get jobs through the Recurse Center, but you say, if you're going to get a job, please let Recurse Center help so that you can make some money through the job pipeline. I am kind of interested in the business, but I'm more interested in, is the long-term vision for Recurse Center, when I think of Recurse Center, I've never been there, but I imagine it to be something like the atmosphere of like a public library where, it's kind of this public resource where people go and they mingle and they use communal resources, and there's a feeling of pursuit of knowledge. Is that what the long-term vision is? Something like a public library?
That's a really interesting analogy. I've never actually thought about that one specifically, but I like a lot of parts of it. Our long-term vision is we want to make the absolute best place in the world to become a better programmer. And we think RC is really great, but there are also tons and tons of ways in which it could be way better. And so we're kind of relentlessly focused on how do we make RC a better environment for people to learn. One of those is how do we make RC itself bigger, continue to grow, because we actually think our model is a little bit different in that it improves as the people involved, kind of the number of people involved grows. And this is one of the reasons why diversity is so important to RC, is that our model is in many respects kind of diametrically opposed to the traditional classroom or curriculum-based model, where if you think about it, a typical classroom or curriculum-based model works best when everyone coming, kind of a small group of people who are effectively all clones of each other, right? If they all have exactly the same learning styles, exactly the same goals, exactly the same prerequisites and current knowledge, and they all progress at exactly the same rate, then you could imagine a kind of lecture-based, curriculum-based model working really well. On the flip side, RC would work terribly if you just had a very small group of people who were all clones of each other, right? RC gets better as you have people from more different backgrounds, who have more different perspectives, who are coming from different past professional and other types of programming experiences, because they bring together all sorts of different pieces of knowledge that they can share with each other. And so, in RC, where you only have 5 people, well, maybe there's nobody else who's a machine learning expert or who has done a lot of work on production distributed systems. But as RC gets bigger, both the current batches and also our alumni network, it becomes way better for those things, such that if you want to do work on distributed systems, well, now there are lots of people in our community who have done substantial work on distributed systems and who have worked at, major tech companies on those things and who can share their knowledge and, review your code or give you feedback on your project.
Right. And you mentioned some diverse backgrounds that people come from. I read that the 3 most common professions that recursors come from are finance, consulting, and law. And to me, these all seem like procedural careers. They are careers that have creativity at the margins, but I feel like I've met a lot of people in finance and law and consulting, and these people I know are tremendously creative, but I imagine that their ability to execute on that creativity is often hindered by the work domain that they find themselves in, and then they hear about programming and they decide they're going to make a career change. Is that kind of the narrative that you hear these people talking about when they're, when you have these lawyers that come through and they're like, okay, I'm ready to switch to programming because I want to access my creative side once again in my career? Why do these people in procedural endeavors come to the Recurse Center?
Well, a quick note is that stat on our website, I should probably look into it again. We put it up there a couple of years ago when we had surveyed the group at that point, which was, I don't know, like 3 years ago. My guess is that that's actually changed since then, though we've certainly had more folks from those backgrounds continue to come. There's just such an unbelievably long tail of backgrounds of people who have come to RC. I mean, we've had professional ballet dancers and performance artists and like stand-up comics and like a huge range of folks, in addition to people from, pretty traditional procedural backgrounds like you mentioned. So to kind of directly answer your question there, I think for some of those people, it's looking for a more creative outlet. But also some of the people, we have people who have been professional lawyers, but they were programming on the side for a number of years, and now want to spend more time focused on, or they now want to make a career shift. And sometimes people are in another field and they want to come and spend 3 months at RC to really focus on kind of programming as a craft. But because they then want to go back and apply programming to their field, maybe they're a research scientist and they're surrounded by people in their day-to-day work who don't really focus or think about how to write, good, high-quality, maintainable code. And so they want to spend 3 months focused on that so that they can then bring those skills back to a lab environment. So there's a really wide range of reasons that people want to become better programmers at RC. And sometimes it's because of a career shift and sometimes it's not. A little over half of the people who come to RC have worked professionally as programmers prior to coming to RC. So the people who are making a full-on career shift, who have never worked as programmers before, are a minority of the folks who come to RC, though they're a substantial one, probably on the order of about 40%, I think.
Okay. So there is this kind of growing narrative or discussion about should everybody learn to code, or there's different gradations of that discussion. When I think about reading, writing, and arithmetic, the things that people often talk about as the cornerstones of a public school education, when you compare programming to reading, writing, arithmetic, it seems like there is as much general applicability, as much mileage that somebody gets out of a basic knowledge of programming. At this point, do you think we're at a phase, or we're at a point where everybody needs to learn to code?
I think there are a couple of ways to answer that question, but I guess the concise way is no. I think it is true that effectively everyone could benefit from being able to program, if even only just a little bit. However, I don't think that translates into everyone should learn how to code. I think everyone who wants to and is interested in learning to program and who makes the assessment for themselves that it is worth their time to develop this skill and then apply it in their lives however they want to, should learn to code. But I kind of hesitate to make a broad edict like everyone should learn how to code.
Would you make an edict to the same degree that people should learn to read, write, and do basic math?
I guess I probably would not. I think those things are also skills that are fundamentally very important and extremely valuable. And I think people do learn those skills given, opportunities. And certainly, things like basic literacy is extraordinarily valuable and effectively essential in order to kind of navigate the world. But I think, basic math is an interesting case where certainly it is valuable for everyone to understand some basic mathematics. However, I would say that that doesn't actually really, that's not the world that we currently live in, right? I would say that most people don't actually learn basic math at kind of a developmental level of actually understanding math. I think people kind of learn math in a superficial by rote way. But I really don't think that you can force people to learn, and I mean learn in the sense of actually actively understand basically anything. I think you can force people to regurgitate things or to memorize things or to fake their way through a test or a class. But I kind of start with the approach that, I think a lot of times people think of education as being kind of vessel filling, that people are these empty vessels that need to have knowledge poured into them. And the kind of mental model or metaphor for education that I prefer to use is the, kind of active engagement of the learner, right? That education is a thing, is an activity that the learner has to actually be actively involved in. And I think that fundamentally means that it has to be a consensual activity. It's something that people are actually choosing to do, that they're actually intellectually engaged in a way that requires their consent and their own involvement. And so I think really that is at the core of how you actually really learn anything. But all of that's to say is, of course, reading, writing, arithmetic, programming, all of these are tremendously useful skills. And we want to support people in learning those things. But I don't think yelling at people and telling them this is what you should learn or this is what you must learn by time X is a particularly productive strategy.
Got it. So talking more about the Recurse Center, as we have discussed, Recurse Center is this mostly self-directed environment. The freedom to explore is core to the structure. And this is kind of orthogonal to most other types of education because there's no exams, breathing down your neck that are going to come up in a month. That I remember this feeling from college where you're this anxiety is gradually welling up as you come closer to the exam. There's no grades. There aren't much classes or curriculum. So give me more of a picture of how this works and how people learn in this environment.
Well, the first thing is that the people come to RC, right, are actively choosing to be there. In fact, almost everyone who comes to RC makes huge sacrifices to do it, right? The average recursor probably quits their job and moves states, if not countries, in order to attend RC. So people are coming to RC because they really want to be there. And they want to be there, not because they get some sort of degree or certificate or what have you. We explicitly do not grant either of those things because we don't want people coming for proxy reasons. We want people coming because they want to become better programmers. So I think just that one difference gives us a huge slew of advantages, which is everyone who's at RC wants to be there. They're making an active choice to be there. And therefore, people are going to make good use of their time there and care about it and focus on how they can actually get a lot out of their time at RC. So instead of thinking about how can we force people to do X, Y, or Z, we think about how can we provide lots of useful resources. So for instance, instead of having teachers, we have something called facilitators who are full-time RC employees, who are programmers themselves, whose primary reason for being at RC is to help people get the most they can out of their badge. So that means we do things like help people brainstorm project ideas or rubber duck talking through what, based off of what people's goals are or how they want to grow, what might be a good path for them to follow through RC. Because we're starting with a group of people who are so actively choosing to be at RC, we don't have to spend a lot of time thinking about how do we force people to learn X. If they are actually not interested in learning X, then that's not really our goal. Our goal is to help people, assuming that they're coming to RC in the first place to become better programmers, help them become better programmers. That doesn't mean we don't give advice or that we don't give feedback, but it does mean that the kind of ultimate arbiters of people's education and growth are individuals themselves, and that we are there in effectively a support role to help people flourish and to help people grow as much as possible, but ultimately in line with the goals that people set out for themselves.
Wealthfront is an automated investing service that saves you time. As an engineer, your time is valuable. If you want to invest, but you don't want to spend significant time evaluating your portfolio and allocating assets, take a look at Wealthfront. Go to wealthfront.com/SEDaily to open an account today and get a special offer for Software Engineering Daily listeners. $15,000 managed for free when you open your account. With traditional investment services, there are many humans in the loop that are doing things that Wealthfront automates away. When you pay the commissions and account fees of these traditional investment services, you're paying for work that could be done by a computer. So don't pay commissions and account fees. Maximize your gains with Wealthfront's Set It and Forget It investment automation. Check out wealthfront.com/SEDaily. It would support Software Engineering Daily, and it would introduce you to the world of automated investing. Wealthfront.com/SEDaily. Thanks to Wealthfront for being a continued sponsor of the show. Now, let's get on with the show. Now, a large component of that giving people freedom, helping them learn to explore this area properly is you want to remove fear from the participants. You want to iron out cases where people might feel imposter syndrome. There are these interesting social phenomenon that really get highlighted when you're a programmer sitting down to try to accomplish something that requires this mix of creativity and focus. And there are so many psychological things that can get in the way. And I feel like, when I was reading your rules, your social rules, you really have a sense of the types of psychological and sociological impediments that programmers can encounter as they are learning to program. So why don't you talk through some of those unique challenges that people encounter, the psychological and sociological challenges that people encounter as they're learning to code, and how you can factor those out with the right environment and the right set of social rules?
Yeah. As you mentioned, we have a set of 4 lightweight social rules that are designed to help make a more kind of productive and enjoyable educational environment. So the first of these social rules is no well actuallys that we actually started before we even were running RC. My co-founders and I would actually well actually each other all the time. So a well actually is when you kind of interject or interrupt somebody in a conversation or respond in a way that maybe corrects some pedantic side point, but detracts from the actual core thing you're trying to discuss.
It's like, well, actually, you can have a garbage collector for C++ if you implement it.
Correct. Yeah. Like, that's a good example. So anyway, basically anything that kind of takes away from the core focus of what you're trying to actually convey is kind of an obstacle in the way of this. And this was the thing we noticed ourselves doing. We would not, we'd be trying to have a discussion about our company or business, and we would be doing these well actuallys that were kind of subconsciously, we realized, a way to try to assert yourself, to show that you know something or that you're clever or, whatever, rather than focusing on how to actually grow, how to get better, or how to solve whatever the problem is at hand. Yeah, exactly. And so that we started just amongst ourselves, and we noticed immediately that it really improved our working relationships, that we became more effective as a team. So when we actually started the first batch of RC, it was just kind of obvious to us, like, this works so well internally for us that we want to make sure the environment we're building here is going to include it. And then the following 3 social rules, which are no feigned surprise, no backseat driving, and no subtle isms, those all came about over the course of our first 3 batches as we observed behavior that we thought was either educationally or socially disruptive. So no feigned surprise means that you shouldn't act surprised when somebody says that they don't know something. So, if I had said, oh my God, I can't, if I had said, what's a garbage collector? And you said, oh my God, I can't believe you don't even know what a garbage collector is. How can you be a programmer and not know what a garbage collector is? That's kind of has no social or educational value. All it does is kind of grandstanding for one person to try to make themselves, kind of feel a little bit better about themselves. But the much more salient and problematic aspect of it is that it makes, the person who admitted that they don't know something feel bad and be less likely to acknowledge they don't know things in the future. And this, I think, is particularly harmful in programming because so much of what we do is cumulative, where it keeps building on it. Previous things. So if you don't understand something and you just kind of don't either acknowledge to other people or to yourself that you don't understand, and you just kind of keep muddling along, it gets kind of worse and worse. And so what we want to do is build an environment where people are comfortable saying, I don't understand. I've never heard of a garbage collector. Could you explain more about that? So that it is an opportunity for people to learn something new rather than, to kind of shy away from or just pretend that they know something. And the third is no backseat driving. Backseat driving means basically people shouldn't unhelpfully kind of interject and lob advice in when other people are collaborating or working together. And that if you want to be part of a conversation or collaborate with people, then you should actually become kind of fully engaged and say, hey, can I join this conversation, or can I contribute in this way? Because again, that just gets at a behavior that we saw as disruptive to people trying to actually become better programmers. That maybe 2 people are working through a problem and they know that they could go look it up on Wikipedia, but the value to them is being able to actually work through it on their own. And so somebody just interjecting and not really having that context, can be disruptive. And then finally, no subtle isms is our attempt to provide kind of a third path for dealing with things like sexism and racism and homophobia and other forms of oppression. And so for a lot of times, especially folks from marginalized groups, when something happens, it's kind of small. Somebody asks, like, where are you really from? Or you're a woman at a programming
microaggressions.
Meetup. Yeah, and you're at a programming meetup and, somebody asks a woman, do you know how to code? Or things like that, where they're very minor things and you kind of have this choice of, do I either say something and make it seem like I'm making a kind of a mountain out of a molehill or making a big deal of it, or do I not say anything? And then over time, these little things kind of build up and it just kind of increases tension and makes things, just kind of worse over time. And so the goal with Our fourth social rule, the no subtle isms, and also with really all of our social rules, is to provide kind of a lightweight release valve, a way for people to give each other and to receive this very lightweight feedback and say, hey, that's subtly sexist, or hey, that was backseat driving. Not in a way like, oh, you broke a social rule, my gosh, you're a bad person or even a bad recursor. The expectation is that people break the social rules sometimes, and that's fine. We all screw up and make mistakes. It's just the important thing is that people then have a way to give this feedback in a lightweight way, hear it, and then move on. And so that we've found has been very effective for making an environment that is more conducive to close collaboration and people being able to acknowledge and then address their ignorance.
So you mentioned the example of this guy that came through Recurse Center and he built a version of GitHub on a peer-to-peer protocol on BitTorrent. And that I find really interesting because it is this example of somebody who's doing something experimental. It kind of resembles a product. So it's something that maybe would be done in graduate school, but not really. It doesn't have immediate, perhaps business viability. So this may not be something that this guy would do on his own. So it's kind of like it makes sense for him to come to somewhat of a learning environment to implement something like this. What draws experienced developers to the Recurse Center? Experienced developer has so many options. You could go to some random startup, you could go to a big company, you could go do research at a university. Why would you go to the Recurse Center?
So it's funny. There's kind of this interesting split sometimes when we describe RC to people, kind of one group of folks responding like, oh my gosh, that sounds like paradise. And one group of people say, wait, why would somebody who's already a programmer and can get paid to do it ever come and just spend 3 months working on becoming a better programmer? And so I think the answer is if you're a type of person who it really enjoys the idea of getting to actually focus on the stuff that you're interested in, writing in the language that you're interested in learning or that you really most enjoy working in, and starting a new project that, has maybe no, financial value, or at least direct, immediate financial value. And, you want to be able to work on the stuff that you're actually interested in. That is a major draw of RC. Even for very experienced programmers, it's really hard to get that as an opportunity. At most jobs, rightfully so, right? The work that you do day to day, even if you have 20% time or whatever, the bulk of your work is doing something that's of value to the company, which may be in line with how you want to grow or what you're interested in, but may not be. And certainly your top priority at a company is rarely your own personal growth. But at RC, it's flipped. Your top priority is your own personal growth. So that's one major reason. Another is that when you come to RC, you're surrounded by other people who are similarly motivated. We look for people who are smart, friendly, intellectually curious, self-directed, and who enjoy programming and want to get dramatically better, regardless of if they've been programming for several months or a couple of decades, or anything in between. So again, back to our earlier discussion of access to a really awesome group of people. That's another reason to come to RC. I think also there's a kind of an element of almost a social hack involved in RC, in that there are aspects of RC that you could recreate by just quitting your job and staying home for 3 months. But there's something kind of frowned upon societally of being like, I'm just going to sit around at home and program. Whereas if you do a thing that has a name and it is someplace else, that it's much easier to tell your coworkers and your friends and your family, I'm quitting my job and moving across the world to do RC. So I think that is another benefit that we provide. And then we try to, again, in addition to the people that we fill RC with, we try to bring as many other useful resources as possible into it. So opportunities for code review and pair programming and workshops and seminars. We bring in outside residents and a lot of outside speakers, sometimes very prominent folks. So for instance, just yesterday, we had Jerry Sussman, who's a co-author of The Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, and also legendary MIT professor and AI researcher and a slew of other things. He came and spent the whole day at RC and then gave a talk on building kind of more robust software. And that's the type of opportunity that you can have at RC, but it's very hard to find, anywhere else.
Yeah, I can certainly contrast the sole idea of doing something on your own, but having people around you as being really important. I have been doing this podcast, and a lot of it has been in an extremely isolated context. I don't know many people in Seattle, which is really not healthy. It's really not healthy to spend a long period of time by yourself. But the same thing, but by the same token, it's really valuable to program to hack on something by yourself and encounter all the challenges that you encounter hacking on something by yourself. And the Recurse Center seems like this really interesting medium where you can get that personal growth. You can hack on whatever you want, and you can also have access to a community of people, support community. Socialization.
And the community's been a really amazing and somewhat surprising thing. When we started RC, we didn't realize just how important and big a part of RC the community would become. And now I think in many respects, it is actually the most valuable and interesting part of RC. Our informal motto is never graduate. And while, people come to RC to become better programmers, there are a lot of other incidental benefits that people get that we didn't actually expect. So one of those big things is people make really close friends, like amazingly close friends over a relatively short period of time, which is really fascinating to see. When we started RC, I don't think I expected that, people would end up being in each other's wedding parties, right? Or traveling around the world together, and meeting up in other countries, or all of these incredible social bonds that get established because people are working together in a friendly and collaborative environment. And then so even if they only spend say 3 months at RC, those bonds and many of the benefits from RC we see, they actually persist for many, many, many years later. And so our community is now about 850 people who have come to RC from nearly 50 countries now. And so there's this just incredible community globally distributed of people who both have shared this experience with each other, and also then have an opportunity to meet lots of other people who have been through the community who may not have been in the same batch, but they still have this kind of shared experience because they both went through similar things. And that's something that we really did not expect when we were starting RC.
Talk more about the business model of the Recurse Center.
So RC is free for everyone to attend. We've never charged any tuition or any other fees, and people can attend RC regardless of what they want to do after it. So people come to RC sometimes and they've already accepted a new programming job before they get here, or they're only sophomores in college and they still have more school to go, or they're in the middle of grad school, or what have you. People don't need to want a job. However, if people come to RC and either right after their batch or many years down the line, they are interested in a new programming job, we provide lots of tools and support to help them ideally find one at one of our partner companies. So we work with a number of companies ranging from small 2 or 3 person startups to mid-sized startups that are several hundred people, to large public companies, to technology-focused hedge funds and other finance companies, kind of a broad range of companies. And we have effectively recruiting agreements set up similarly to how contingency recruiting works, where if we refer somebody to a company, and they hire that person and they stay for at least 3 months, then the company pays us 25% of base first year salary. And that is a fee that the company pays on top of the salary. It's not something that, individuals pay. It doesn't affect, people's, salaries or paychecks in any way. The company pays that fee directly to RC. And that is how we fund all of RC, is through revenue from placing our alumni at our recruiting partners.
Okay, and have you? Does the money from that, is that balancing out well in terms of the expenses that you have?
So yes and no. Yes, in the sense that we have operated exclusively off of that revenue for several years now. No, in the sense that it limits how we can grow and what experiments we can try, because while we make enough money to stay in operation, there are countless things that we would love to be able to do, but we're constrained by our business model working well, but not so super well that we are flush with cash and can grow and try all sorts of interesting experiments like that. So mixed, I guess. But
right.
It's the thing that we continue to focus on, is how to make our core business work better and better so that we can then reinvest that money into making RC a better place to become a great programmer.
Do you see some of the effects or some of the things that Recurse Center and certainly some of these coding boot camps, some of the things that these places are doing right, do you see that propagating back to the universities?
I don't think I've kept a close enough eye on what exactly universities are doing to really answer that question well. Certainly there are things that I've seen universities do that seem like partially a response to things boot camps at least are doing. Seen classes based around at major respected universities that are based around learn full stack web development. And certainly that's very different than the type of material that was covered, when I was an undergraduate, just 8 or 9 years ago. Beyond that, I don't actually know how much they've really incorporated. I would imagine that they will continue to evolve and change. But to be honest, I think it's both a positive and a negative thing that we've done is we are pretty focused on what we're doing at RC and the things we need to do in order to be better. And I think that has a lot of benefits in that it keeps us focused. And I think that's really important for any institution or organization or company to have, is lots of good focus. But it also means that we haven't spent as much time kind of looking out to what the rest of the world is doing. And I think that certainly has its downsides.
So what are those things that you feel you need to improve on? Are there some KPIs that you keep track of, or what are you looking at in terms of what will be to the benefit of Recurse Center if you improve?
So one thing we would like to really improve on RC, or I guess really change about RC, is we would like to see many more people working on kind of substantial larger scale software projects. So I mentioned the GitTorrent project earlier. I think that's a good example of the type of thing that we'd like to see more of. Most of what people work on at RC is typically smaller projects that maybe only last a week or a few weeks, rather than major pieces of open source software that take months or years to develop. And we would love to see more of that type of work happening at RC. So that's a thing that we've been thinking about recently, is how do we foster an environment that makes it easier for people to focus on kind of more ambitious projects and larger scale software projects, because we think that would actually make RC a better educational environment, and also that there are a lot of things that people learn in tackling projects like that that you can't learn or typically don't learn on smaller scale projects. And then also, of course, we think that would just benefit the world if RC were producing a substantial amount of really valuable open source software.
So when people go through the Recurse Center and they have an unsuccessful outcome. What is usually the cause of that?
So I think one pitfall people fall into at RC is it's kind of two things, but I think they're related to each other. The first is that RC is a legitimately different environment. The things that make RC really great are also those that make it really challenging, which is that in so much of the rest of the world, there are people telling you what you need to do or what you must do or what you must work on, whether that's in school or at work, what people actually do. And a lot of times what their actual goals are ones that they haven't really set for themselves. And so figuring out how to set your own goals and how to operate in a self-directed environment is a big struggle for almost everyone who comes to RC. And I think that some folks struggle with that more so than others. And it always takes people some amount of time to kind of adjust to figuring out how to navigate RC. And kind of in line with that, a challenge is because there's so much interesting stuff happening at RC that on any given day, there might be a code review group and a book reading group and a little intro workshop on some sort of new tool and a presentation, and you're working on your own projects and somebody's asking you to pair program, and there are all these interesting things that you can do, which is, on the one hand, great and what makes RC so special. And on the other hand, really, really challenging because it's easy to get distracted and to spread yourself too thin. And I think so one of the core challenges of RC is how do you, leave yourself open enough to serendipity and being distracted so that you can take advantage of all of these great things going on around you, while at the same time not becoming so distracted that you can't really focus or go deep on anything and you're kind of only doing things at a superficial level. And I think that's a core struggle that all of us face. And it's, I think, a particularly challenging struggle at RC.
I agree with that. I think and also the things you mentioned just about the business itself. I think focus is so hard in any context, whether you're a programmer on your own or a business or it's just the age of distraction, and focus is always a challenge. You can't have enough of it. So I guess last question. If somebody is listening to this, they're interested in checking out the Recurse Center or becoming a member, what is the process for applying, and what are some tips for people who are interested in going to the Recurse Center?
So people can apply on our website, which is recurse.com. We have a short written application where we ask people to solve a simple programming problem, basically a variant of FizzBuzz. We ask people to share a small code sample, which is a piece of code that they've written on their own from scratch to give us a sense of where they currently are as a programmer. And then we have a couple of short essay questions where we ask people to explain why they want to do RC, what they're hoping to get out of it or learn, and things like that. We review those applications, and then the ones that we think are promising, we invite to a first round conversational interview where we actually spend most of that time discussing a lot of the things that, a lot of the same questions that are in the application. Why do people want to come to RC? What would success look like for them? What are they hoping to get out of their time at RC? What a little bit more about their programming backgrounds, what they're interested in learning, things like that. If that goes well, then we invite people to a second round pair programming interview. And the goal with this interview is to get a sense of what it's actually like to program with somebody. So people can choose whatever programming language they are most comfortable in, and definitely encourage people. One easy way to improve your odds of getting into RC is just choose the language that you are actually most comfortable in. Don't choose something that you've just started working in that day. And people can select either to work on one of their own projects that they already have and propose a feature or some addition they want to make to that during the interview, Or we have a set of a few small suggested pairing tasks that people can select from. And if they choose one of those, then there's information about what they should work on before the interview, and then what they and the interviewer will work on during the interview. And what we're looking for there is, do people understand the code that they're writing? Do they have a reasonable mental model for it and the language that they're using? Are they open to feedback? Are they people that we can, communicate well with and collaborate with? Things like that. So as far as advice for applying, I think the first thing is to kind of get the basics right. And I mean, taking the time to reflect and think about, okay, is RC a thing that I really want? And then thoughtfully answering the questions on our application. Make sure to actually write Cracklepop, the short FizzBuzz variant that we have, correctly. There's no trick. We're not expecting some super clever solution or something like that. We just want to see that people can write readable code that's reasonable, that actually works and prints out what we're expecting. To include a code sample that is representative of where you currently are as a programmer. So I guess those are the primary pieces of advice for the applications phase. I think common pitfalls in the interviews are people who want RC for reasons that aren't really what RC is. If people's primary interest is starting a business or something else that isn't actually aimed at becoming a better programmer, then RC is probably not a good fit because it's not going to help them get what they really want. And to my earlier point, one of the most important things is that people are coming to RC because they want to be there and because they have goals that are in line with and compatible with what we're doing. So that's one thing that we really care about. We also care to see that people are already programming. So even if somebody has just started programming a few months ago, we want to see that they're not just talking about programming or that they have a theoretical interest in it, but that they've actually taken the time to sit down and write some code. I think that's very important. The next thing that is pretty important in just a general kind of meta interviewing skill is we don't have any trick questions. And it's just really helpful when people just honestly and directly and straightforwardly answer a question. The goal is not to have, don't have talking points or whatever. I think some of the most challenging interviews are when people aren't kind of intellectually engaged in the conversation. And so I think just really listening to what questions we're actually asking, thinking, and then responding sounds kind of simple and silly, but I think is actually hugely helpful in being, kind of more successful at getting into RC.
All right. Well, Nick, this has been a great conversation. I am a big fan of the Recurse Center. I think it's a really unique approach to education and coding and building stuff. So thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It was lots of fun.
Thanks to Symfano for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symfano is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symfano.com/sedaily. That's symphono.com/sedaily. Thanks again, Symfano.
Wow.